Hello, everyone. I would first like to thank Kashf for organizing this session and inviting us both to hold this discussion. When we were putting together these slides, I was thinking about the time when we had just begun as early career scholars and initially found it somewhat challenging to write good abstracts. And I don't think we had such useful sessions to guide us, and we largely ended up relying on journal abstracts to observe how they were written, what kind of details were included. So we both are really excited to be a part of this initiative. Ashwin and I will draw upon our experience of writing one particular abstract for a paper that we have been working on for a while now. And in fact, we have built one exercise for our participants around two different iterations of that abstract. And we hope that this journey of the abstract will offer some meaningful tips on the writing process. I'll begin by giving a very brief overview of the session, what this presentation entails, and then Ashwin and I will alternate between slides and we'll take you through broadly through what an abstract is, what does it entail, the structure, and then we'll kind of come to the exercise that we have developed for the participants. So we'll begin by highlighting what an abstract is and what one must focus on when developing an abstract. Then we'll broadly talk about the structure of the abstract. Here, one clarification that we both want to offer is that because we are trained as sociologists, so our writing is sociological, anthropological in nature. And I think the structure that we will highlight is broadly, generally applicable to most disciplines, but at the same time we'll also like to kind of emphasize that it is possible that some disciplines may have some unique expectations from their abstracts. The third aspect that we would like to emphasize on is clarity, and how clarity is this continuous ongoing process, how to arrive at clarity and focus in the abstract. We have also included two examples from to kind of highlight what reviewers of abstracts look for. Usually when we apply for conferences or some other medium, decisions are often communicated either as accepted or rejected, but sometimes we are also given some detailed feedback, or we are told what exactly reviewers look for. So we have included those examples just to get a sense of how to structure an abstract effectively, adequately. And finally, we'll kind of, introduce the exercise and dedicate some part of the session to this interactive exercise, and end with examples, more examples, and Q&A session. Vidushi, can you move to the next slide, please? So, what is an abstract? So, basically, abstract is like a pitch that presents the context of your research, the main argument of your research, in a very coherent, precise, succinct manner. As we all know, that abstracts are expected to be very concise and precise, and there is always a word limit that one has to adhere to. So it's important that we choose our words very carefully and thoughtfully, and every word matters in an abstract. So those words are the keywords, the concepts that your paper deal with, you those keywords that you would like your paper and your work to be identified with, you would like the reader to identify your work with. So words are to be chosen very carefully. Writing an abstract is also a very serious intellectual craft. We call it a craft because, on the one hand, we have to ensure that the abstract provides an overview of your work. It has to be clear, it has to be unambiguous. One must avoid writing a convoluted, highly complicated abstract that is all over the place. And it has to be coherent in style and argument. And at the same time, we have to also ensure that it doesn't reveal every detail about the study. So the craft basically lies in generating just enough curiosity in the reader to know more. And as Ashwin has very beautifully put it, it is like a teaser or a trailer for a movie. It invites the reader to engage more with the paper by presenting its best part in a coherent manner. And as we all know, as academics, we depend on abstracts of journal articles to identify relevant literature for our studies. And therefore, it also becomes important for us to make available a written abstract so that, other researchers can also locate our papers. And over to you, Ashwin, and he'll talk about the structure of the abstract.
Thanks, Shriti. Vidushi, can we move to the yeah. So taking off, following up on the uh, reference to movies and trailers, we wanted to also broadly break down the structure of a good abstract. Um, and the structure of a good abstract is effectively a balancing act between broad frameworks, broad literature, broad areas of research, and specifics of the paper or the talk or the lecture that the abstract is for. Um, so, roughly, an abstract will set the brief context of your research while also presenting the main arguments of the topic that you're engaging with, its research questions, and explain the significance of the study for your specific field. Hmm. In doing this, it often moves from really broad research topics of in the field or subfield to your specific research questions. So, for instance, you will notice that in most abstracts are also in journal articles followed by keywords. And so the abstract works along with keywords. So think, for instance, think about a keyword for your paper being, let's say, governance or global south. Um, Now, within the idea of governance and within global south, you can imagine the range of literature, the range of research that would have gone into it. So these are ways in which you narrow down some bits of what your work is, but the abstract gives more details about what your work specifically within governance, within global south, within those keywords or sort of contributes. In this, so you've outlined the broad aspects of the research, but you balance that with specifics. So the specifics of the abstract include methods of inquiry, like the is it qualitative research, quantitative research, is there primary or secondary review? You outline the site and location of your research, what, and these include not only physical spaces of where you did your research, it can also be digital platforms. You'll see that digital ethnography is becoming more and more a phenomena of research. So you outline what is the specific of your research, and these specifics of the abstract help other researchers locate our work. Hmm. And so this is exactly the ways in which you sort of grab the attention of the reader. And in this balancing act, you will see that so we Sriti and I discussed, and we found that typically a good abstract has at least these three features: one, hook, a main argument, and key contribution. So think about the hook, taking following up from the example of the teaser or the trailer. Think about what grabs your attention in a teaser that makes you curious about wanting to watch the whole movie. So we have to think about abstract as something that will grab attention and then encourage you to explore the whole paper. And you will remember, it's important to remember that more people will read the abstract than the entire paper. So the hook plays that role. In a teaser or a trailer, the hook usually is like a very good song or a very intense, interesting scene that captures attention, right? So in an abstract, it can be a vignette from, or if you've done an ethnographic research, it can be some statement that you heard your participants say, which immediately grabs attention. So you have to then connect that attention into a main argument. Now, a, a good abstract will also tell you what the main argument is. The abstract ideally shouldn't be about, oh, this is the hook, and then to no more read the entire paper. An abstract will tell you what the main argument is, and that main argument is your voice, your what you want to say with the piece. uh, so the interesting bit about the piece would not necessarily be the argument alone, but about how you have come up with the argument. So people would be interested in reading the paper or attending a talk or a lecture to know how you've come up with the argument. And so the argument also has to be presented in a very coherent and succinct manner in the abstract. Having done that, you also have to say why this is important. And that's the key contribution. So these three things, hook, main argument, and key contribution, you can creatively play with it in what way you want to make it appear in your abstract, but you ideally have all these three elements in a good abstract. And over to you, Sriti, for the next part.
So, as we were talking about how writing an abstract is a serious intellectual craft, it's an exercise. So, a good abstract is important for academics because it brings first clarity to the author about the core arguments that are made in the paper. So abstracts are often written before writing a paper, but they also evolve as the paper begins to take shape, and this is something that we will be able to explain better when we discuss the abstract that both Ashwin and I are working on. So it was conceptualized based on our regular conversations. Then it was modified based on this upcoming symposium that we wanted to kind of participate in. So the concept note of the symposium became very important for us, and we'll discuss later how we tried to speak to the theme of the symposium. And then finally, when we wrote the paper, the abstract also kept evolving. So it's a continuous, ongoing process, and therefore, clarity is an ongoing process. And this whole process of writing and rewriting brings a lot of coherence and clarity to the authors. So you may also consider an abstract as a compass because it also helps you to stay focused. So you write an abstract before writing a paper, and then you revisit it after the paper has taken a final shape. The abstract has to highlight the main argument of your paper, and your paper has to align with the abstract. So that is why we are thinking of the abstract as a compass for the author. The focus of the abstract is also modified, it also shifts based on who the intended reader is, what the intended medium is. So for example, if there is a conference that we are trying to participate in, it is important that our abstract aligns with the larger theme and the sub themes of the conference. So for instance, I'll give an example of a conference that I was interested in. It was on transitions, broadly on transitions, and they had listed life transitions, economic transitions, so on and so forth. So I had developed something, there was something from my PhD work which was on the imagination of the urban from the margins. So how marginalized populations in a city imagine the urban, and how they aspire to a certain kind of educated urban distinction. So it is also an aspiration for mobility, an aspiration to move out, in this case, from the slum. So uh, I had to then make very explicit connections with the theme of transition, highlighting the urban transitions, the economic transitions, the educational transitions, and broadly the life transitions that were emerging from this study. So that's why we are trying to kind of argue that keeping the concept note in mind, identifying the aspects that the concept note highlights, and then developing your abstract that speaks to those concepts, those ideas, is important. Over to you, Ashwin.
Thanks, Riti. So at this stage, we wanted to also show some of the rubrics and frameworks against which abstracts are judged. And we're showing two examples. This is from the rubric that British Education Research Association uses to judge or to assess abstracts that have been submitted for its annual conference. And so most of us submit an abstract to present in conferences, and these are some of the rubrics on the basis of which the abstract is judged. You'll notice that they look for clarity of the research focus, originality of the research, rigor of research, and significance of the proposals. You can try and connect it to the structure that we were presenting, the hook, main argument, key contribution, because the intention of the conference is to highlight new research. You'll see that a lot of emphasis is placed on originality of the research and rigor of the research. So when you're writing an abstract for a conference, you really want to highlight how what you have presented gives new information or new insights into what we know about. But again, it's balanced against significance of the proposal. So some of these benchmarks are what we outline or are what we address when we're writing an abstract. Can we move to the next slide, please? Another example of a benchmark or framework is for instance, we took the Open Encyclopedia of Anthropology's structure, and they noted that these frameworks become essential for the review process. Now, here you'll notice that their framework is a little different. They start by saying that you highlight how you define or understand a concept, what key insights does it present to cultural anthropologists beyond the conventional understanding of the concept, and then you clearly lay out the structure of the entry that's going to follow. Now, in this situation, the intention of the abstract is slightly different from that of a conference, right? Think about how you approach or how you refer to an encyclopedia, and what is it that you as a reader is looking for in an encyclopedic entry. We want to understand what the definition of a concept is. What is the concept offering to a broader understanding of the or what this entry offers to a broader understanding of the concept in relation to what's generally known, what are the dominant literature in the field. And so against those metrics, abstracts are judged with these frameworks. So you, in this context, you outline what the definition is, which you did not see in the previous one. You outline how this presents a new understanding to the cultural understanding of the concept, and what is the structure of the concept. So you see that as Shriti was saying, the with the change in the medium of the output, if it's a text, if it's an encyclopedia entry, if it's a conference piece, if it's a journal article, with the change in the medium, the nature of the abstract will change and the structure of the abstract will change. And so it's important to respond to, let's say, the concept note, what the reviewers are looking for, but keep a more creative understanding of the hook, main argument, and key contribution in mind. So these are some of the broad contours in which we sort of write an abstract while we're responding to some of the themes. I think with this, we'll move to the exercise, and over to you, Sriti.
Okay. So we have planned a very short exercise for our participants. Um, I think I've already explained very briefly about this paper that Ashwin and I have been working on. So this was conceptualized I think at the end of 2023. This was very spontaneously conceptualized because we used to have these regular conversations about teaching sociology, the sociology classroom, the conditions and the climate in which sociology is studied and taught today, and the demands that are placed upon students of sociology and the teachers teaching in different contexts and institutions. So we had some initial ideas, and then there was this symposium which we felt could be very relevant and would also help us to get some clarity on what we wanted to write. So we have the concept note of the symposium for the participants. So what we would like our participants to do is go through the concept note and then identify the themes and aspects and compare it with the two iterations of the abstracts that we have developed. So the abstract one is the first iteration that we had submitted for this symposium. Abstract 2 is something that was developed later based on the feedback that we got from the symposium. We also presented this paper in another conference in Barcelona later. So we had some feedback to revise the abstract, and then we also wrote the paper and revisited the abstract. So it has gone through different formulations, and I think if you pay close attention, you'll see how the abstract has changed, shifted in focus, how clarity has also kind of shifted. So, as we have already explained, it has to be read simultaneously with the concept note because it has to be aligned with the concept note. So, these are the two things that we would like our participants to focus on. And I think, Vidushi, we have already shared the document with you. Um, Perhaps the participants can take about 10 to 15 minutes to go through the concept note and the two abstracts. You can put down some notes and comments, share it with us in the chat box, or once we are all done and we reconvene, we can maybe allow the participants to raise hands and speak up if that is okay. Yes.
Yes. Just do you want me to share it on the screen as well, Shruti and Ashwin? On the screen, or do you want the screen to just show the slide and they can refer to the document by themselves?
So the document has been added on the chat box.
Yes.
And we wanted to show the two prompts, but if you want, we can the next three slides also show the concept note abstract one and abstract two. So we can
Okay.
go over it on the screen, but our participants also have access to the document to go over it on their own pace.
Okay. So I think we can just give 10 minutes and whatever to
Yeah.
participants for them to
Yeah.
go through it by themselves, and then you can continue with the
Yeah.
discussion.
Yeah.
So we resume around 6:45. Is that okay?
Yeah,
Or
just to everybody, you don't have to leave the room. You can just be online. Just take a moment, go through the document, and we'll share the link again. Just have a look at the document, and then we can start the discussion after 10 minutes. So just take 10. Well, 6:45 is when we resume again with the discussion. Yes.
Shall we reconvene now? If the participants have gone over the document, please write your responses in the chat box, raise your hands in response to the prompts on the screen. We have one response. Okay. And
Interesting how.
yeah,
Sorry,
thank
Ashwin.
you. Thank you so much. And were you also able to outline what were the concepts that ran through from the concept note to abstract one and two?
If I can respond, I mean, if participants don't want, are taking some time, I thought the notions of pedagogies of care was something that ran through and it really responded to it immediately.
Mhm.
Also, that experience from learning, teaching in spaces, that's something that was concept note was talking about, and you were writing and addressing that directly. And the idea of care in itself, what it means in the current times with the neoliberal
Yeah,
reorganization of these whole sector. These are the three things that I thought ran through the three pieces.
yeah, yeah. Um, right. Thank you. Yes, Aditya, please respond.
Yeah. Hello?
Yeah.
We
Am I
can hear
audible?
you. Please.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so in first two abstracts, what I felt was like in first abstract we have used lots of personal pronouns, which is not viable when you're writing an abstract. Because it's highly discouraged. Second thing is like in the first abstract we have given away your research question, which is again like it's not advised, because in an abstract like you don't use these kind of personal pronouns, and like in the second abstract is way more academic per se, like you're not used personal pronouns, plus you have not given away the research questions. So that these are the two major things that I have like distinguished so far.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, so just to contextualize, abstract one was an abstract that we had submitted to present our paper in a conference. And abstract two was then changed to present. Abstract two is for the paper that's coming up as a special issue journal article. So the change in the writing style, if you notice, is also catering to the kind of medium that we are trying to address. And so Aditya, what you were saying about personal pronouns and research questions, these were all strategic decisions that we were making, keeping the idea of the medium in mind. What we wanted to highlight were that there's not necessarily a standard format for abstracts which will fit all mediums. We keep the reader in mind. We keep the so in the context of the first abstract, the reader specifically that we were writing to were the reviewers who would be selecting the abstracts. And in the second context, in the second abstract, the reader in mind was the reviewers, the comments that the reviewers had given us, and a more general audience who would be reading the specific journal that we were trying to publish in. Um, I think both the abstracts try to highlight where the source of the data is from. And that source of the data comes from personal experiences. And as most of you have already outlined, the pedagogy of care is the broader concept that both the abstracts respond to. Sriti, would you like to add something?
Also, like sorry, so I just want to ask one more
Yeah.
thing. Like you talk about uh, personal experiences as a part of methodology. Rather than using personal experience, why haven't you used autoethnography? Because usually in performance studies, people use this term autoethnography as a part of methodology. So why haven't you used this term rather than using personal experiences? Like, could you just like elaborate?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Autoethnography is a term that we use in the paper, but
Okay.
we
Okay.
have chosen to say personal experiences in the abstract.
Okay. I thought it would sound more academic because that is the main problem in most of the Western audience because they prefer that. So that's why I just pointed it out.
Just to add to that, I think there's
Yeah.
also a difference in the sense that when we
Hmm.
were going into our classrooms, we were not going with the intention of an autoethnography. Uh,
Hmm.
the method itself changes because when you're doing an autoethnography, your participation is with the idea of autoethnography in mind.
Okay.
Personal experience is a little more reflexive. So there are aspects of autoethnography, but we are primarily drawing from personal experience. So there was a
Hmm.
distinction that we were also actively making, that we were not going into the class with the intention of an autoethnography.
We
Also,
have
if you go
many.
back to the concept note, the third line says that conversations between two grant recipients where we often found ourselves swapping notes about our experiences. And this is precisely what Ashwin and I found ourselves doing. We were constantly exchanging notes from teaching sociology in our classrooms, and which is why I think, Ashwin, I don't know if you'll agree, but drawing upon personal experiences reflect is more close to what we were trying to
Yeah,
do. Yeah.
Hmm.
We
I
have one
completely
more
agree.
question from the audience.
Yeah.
Probably we can take that question. Simran,
Simran?
please go ahead.
First
I
of
would also like
all,
to
hi,
add to
Priti.
Simran.
I in both of the abstracts, I noticed that the flow of how the topics are approached is sort of inverse. I could gauge more from the second abstract because it sort of put your personal context first, and then it gave context of what you're studying, and then it sort of rounded up to its significance and how you are going to go about. So I could understand more about what the article is from the second abstract, and I was able to identify more keywords. For the first abstract, it felt just closer to a concept note, but I could gauge more from the second one, which sort of, for any reader who is familiar with sociology, could come up with keywords or could identify if it helps in their research or not.
Thanks, Simran. Yeah, and I think the observations that run consistently in the comments as well is that the second seems to be a little more succinct, clear in the structure, clear in the argument, and uh, and that's again what we were trying to highlight, that it's in response to a broader readership. So we were a lot more conscious of what kind of argument do we want to highlight. In the first abstract, we were specifically writing the abstract for the reviewers, and so the arguments there are very different from arguments in abstract 2. But what we also wanted to show with this exercise was that you can also broadly see that these are similar things, right? That it is responding to pedagogy of care, it is drawing from personal experience. So the main argument and the contribution remains similar in both abstracts, but the ways in which it is structured and presented are very different, keeping the reader in mind. So what we wanted to highlight in this exercise was that the same paper, the same argument is evolving in the way that the abstract of the same argument gets presented. So we wanted to show that clarity, as Sriti was saying in the earlier slide, the clarity that emerges from the abstract is an ongoing process. It keeps evolving, it keeps changing in the way that we perceive the clarity to be with specific audience and readership in mind. So if we wanted to, let's say, make do this paper as a lecture, we would be writing the abstract for this in a very different way. And that's, I think, what we wanted to highlight with the exercise as well. And we're very happy that you were able to very clearly outline that the second is more succinct, it's clearer, it's more precise, it argues, because it has a readership for the journal article in mind.
Also, it was
Sriti,
developed after we had like a finished paper. If I remember correctly, Ashwin, we also had a feedback from the reviewers of the paper after it underwent peer review, specifically on the abstract.
absolutely.
You have noticed that in the first abstract, which was developed uh, when the paper hadn't taken shape and it was only for the symposium and the conference, we have also mentioned a post pandemic context, something that we could not, there wasn't enough scope and space in the paper to develop. So in the second abstract we have removed that context because we could barely touch upon it, elaborate on it, and we were told to actually remove that part, either do justice to it adequately by elaborating upon it in our paper, in our discussion, or to remove it. And this is what I was trying to highlight when I said that the abstract has to align with the paper and the paper has to align with the abstract.
Yeah.
The other point, and this is something someone has mentioned, I think Nirmal has mentioned about the inclusion of alterity and diversity was more specific. So I think the specificity of the second abstract also emerges from how there has been a shift from a very contemplative exploratory tone to a more argumentative tone. So we, if you notice that in the first abstract we are basically trying to say that we will explore and share our experiences, but once we had the paper we were also able to make an argument, and the argument is about the preconditions for sociology, the diversity as a precondition for sociology. And this was something, this is a clarity that we arrived at only after reading and writing, after our after the draft went through multiple revisions, we were able to arrive at this clarity, and then it was reflected in the abstract.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that it's important to keep in mind the process of writing and rewriting the abstract. Because in the way that we read a paper, it appears as if, and the structure of the paper, it appears as if the abstract comes as like a complete entity in the beginning, and then you have an introduction and everything. But when you're working on it, you constantly realize that we keep changing things here and there, and we constantly keep reworking on it. So the second abstract, as Shriti was pointing out, it comes from a complete round of review of having presented the paper from which was pitched in abstract one, having submitted the paper for review with journals, and then getting anonymous reviews from that, and specifically doing that some complete round of revision also gave us a different kind of clarity of what the main argument of the paper is and why it's contributing to the debates. So the clarity comes from that review process, and in that review the abstract gets revised over and over again. Swati, do you want to?
Yeah, hello, professors, firstly. And I have a quick point. Uh, like, it's not about basically the exercise. It's more about writing abstract. So I think once we like first sit and write an abstract, it's more like we are aiming to do 10 things in a paper, but then once we like write it after writing the paper, we realize we can just do three things. And that's when you are talking about writing and like rewriting. So that's what it is specifying. Like abstracts are technically supposed to be written after writing the paper because that's when you have the clear idea of the film and then you are making the trailer, right? But once we like write it before doing it, so we are in a way putting up our aims of what we are looking at the paper and where we are approaching and all of that. So yeah, that's it.
I think you're absolutely right, Swati. And this connects to the question that we have in the chat box from Mr. Vijay about drafting an abstract after completing the paper is becoming quite easy, but before writing the paper, it's a little tougher. Um, Also, because before we're writing the paper, when we write an abstract, we're trying to pitch the project itself, pitch the idea of the paper itself, and we're not sure what we will be able to achieve. It's almost like writing a research proposal and saying that, this is what we would want to do, but once we have the scope to do it, that's when we'll realize what we are able to achieve. So the process in writing an abstract before the paper has been written is to think about it as a pitch, uh, and writing it as a pitch which gives us the space to explore this pitch. So we want to see whether this pitch, whether the specific angle, that's the key contribution that we are making, whether this specific angle is of interest to the reader and the audience. And if that is of interest to the reader and the audience, if that angle, that specific exploration makes sense, we also have to be thinking about the feasibility of that exploration. So when we're writing an abstract before something is written, we want to see whether what we are promising in the abstract is something that we will be able to achieve in the timeline. So we have an idea of the timeline, we have an idea of what format it's going to be in, we have an idea of what is the word limit that we have. So and this is the balancing act between the broads and the specifics. uh, in that, and this keeps changing according to the medium and the format. Sriti, would you like to add something to that?
I think I can. No, Ashwin, I think you have answered the question that was posed. I wanted to respond to Varsha's comment about abstract one uses the term crisis more discursively. Yes, and I think Ashwin would agree that in the second abstract, the nature of the crisis is clearer. We have been able to
Hmm.
actually specify what kind of crisis that we are dealing with in the paper.
I agree.
We
I
also
agree.
have one more question from the audience.
Yeah.
So Kunal has asked a question, probably Ashwin or
Oh,
Shruti could.
Uh,
in the chat box, right?
Sonali, could you read the question for everybody, maybe just so that everybody knows what the question is?
Okay, so Kunal is asking, one concern that applies to both abstracts is that although they gesture towards neoliberalization and employability discourses, they do not sufficiently situate the argument within the existing scholarly literature. Could you clarify whether this was intentional?
Thanks for that, Kunal. This was actually a comment that we had also received from the reviewers in the paper. Uh, because the abstract was only about 150 to 200 words, we intentionally chose to not explore the literature on neoliberalization in the abstract itself, but it is explored in the paper. So, in the abstract, what we wanted to hint at was that we wanted to do this strategic signposting to show that this is something that we are engaging with, but we will do that in the paper. So it becomes relevant because the abstract may not be the space to explore the literature that exists. Because of its limited space, we want to give more emphasis on the argument that we are making and outline the broad areas in which we are engaging with or locating that argument. So, because of that, we speak about neoliberalization assuming that the reader of or the intended audience would know about neoliberalization in this context. So, we situate it in the context of the paper but not the abstract. I hope we addressed the questions and the comments. And I think this was a very interesting exercise to see the same idea changing and evolving, and to see that an abstract is not a final thing and it will keep changing. So let's say, for instance, these were different stages of the abstract. The first was like a pitch stage where we were pitching the presentation in a conference. Having received the responses and feedback, we submitted it for review in a in a journal article. And then once the article is out, and we want to, let's say, do a lecture or a talk about it, then we'll modify the abstract for that talk bio as well. So the similar arguments, key arguments, keep changing in the way that we identify what the hook, main argument, and contribution would be. With this, I think we should move. We had one more example to show, just so that people can see. So this is from an encyclopedia entry. It's in two parts. So the first part is on screen right now, and maybe we can move to the next screen in about 2 minutes.
So this is from the Open Encyclopedia of Anthropology. If you remember, we have included two examples from on what reviewers look for. So one was this rubric that British Education Research Association uses. The other one is from OEA's website, where when you if you want to pitch an entry to OEA, they have listed 3 questions that will help you guide the abstract or the pitch that you send to them. So this is an abstract that has been published, and we have included the source also, and the entry is on outer space.
Ashwin and Shriti, do you want to make some final comments about this abstract, and then maybe we can open up for Q&A to the
Yes.
audience? Yeah,
Yes,
thank you.
absolutely. So what we wanted to do is to present another example of an abstract of a topic that um, neither of us work on, but we found the entry to be really interesting and exciting because it does the job of doing the, like, presenting the hook really well, which is it presents a question which we've not really thought about that much, and it presents that question in a very interesting hook which encourages me as a reader to learn more about. And so it presents so the abstract, you see, it does a really good job of making this connection between what are the human cosmos, what human cosmos interface looks like, and what are the questions that it raises. It does this very interesting job of showing what an anthropological lens on space exploration can do. And that question becomes very interesting because it raises a certain kind of curiosity in me. And so I think when we went over this abstract, what we thought of was that often a good abstract would make you curious, uh, curious enough to explore the content that's produced, that the abstract is an introduction to. And yeah, I think this abstract does that job really well. And we wanted to sort of also highlight how this measures against the rubric that we had presented earlier of the Open Encyclopedia of Anthropology rubric, because how do you define it? How does it engage with cultural anthropology or anthropological understanding? And then what is the framework that it presents the arguments in? So it shows that it presents the hook, main argument, why it's important, key contribution really well, I think. Sriti, would you like to say something and then we open for questions?
I completely agree, Ashwin. And I think one of the strengths of the abstract, because it's an entry for encyclopedia, and one is expected to present a comprehensive overview of all the research, anthropological research that has gone into studying this field. I think the author has identified the three fundamental questions for the readers, and that also kind of lays out the structure of the entry. So if you look at how it ends, it's a very, very effective abstract and immediately excites and makes the reader curious. And there's a lot of clarity and
Yeah.
coherence in how it has been presented.
I think we can open the floor for more questions, reflections on the second abstract, any questions that we want clarifications on.
Sure. Before we open the floor for question, I would like to thank both of you, Shriti and Ashwin, for such an informative session. And I think it was not just helpful in terms of very many practical tips that you shared from your own experiences, but the hands-on experience, the hands-on exercise that you undertook was really engaging. And I am hopeful that our participants also found that useful. And with that, I would like to invite further questions from audience. You can either type it out in chat box or you can also raise your hands.
Sonali, there's a question in chat box by Vijaypal. If you could read that out for everybody.
Yes, thank you, Vidushi. Vijay sir is asking how to learn better drafting of abstract writing, pre-writing, where there could be some good examples, exercises similarly we discussed during our session, and some online resources that you could suggest.
Um, Mr. Vijay, I wish we could suggest online resources. If you remember, I began by saying that when we started out as scholars, I wish there was an initiative of this kind to guide us. We largely rely on reading and writing. Sometimes we are able to receive some useful feedback from the conference organizers. For instance, in this case, we have received extensive feedback from the editors, the peer reviewers. We were also able to present, at two forums. So that is the process that we have followed, and I think I can argue that that is perhaps the best way to go about it. But if Ashwin has something to share.
No, Shriti, I completely agree. because I wish there was some resource that we could access, and which is why I think the initiative was really excellent in outlining such sessions. Because we struggled with this quite a lot, and we continue to struggle with writing abstracts. One thing that we tend to do is read the abstracts that are available for the platforms that we are submitting in. So there will be specific journal. If you're submitting to a specific journal, I would often read the abstract within those journal articles, within those journal, the papers that have been published, and see what structure they follow. Um, so I think the best way to do it would be to have some access to the abstracts that are already there in that medium and try and outline the structure. But broadly, and from our experience, what we've been able to see is that this hook, main argument, and key contribution structure works generally well because it addresses everything that an abstract should ideally have. Yeah, I think that's mostly the comment that I would share.
If I could just quickly add, and this has been so useful that there are two things. One is that if Shriti and Ashwin are happy to share their presentation, what we can do is we can, giving them due credit, we can put the presentation on our website. So it's available as a resource for future scholars to have a reference point. Secondly, there was some open access resources that some universities here, at least where I'm studying, can have something on abstract writing. We can always put those resources or the links to those resources in our presentation and add that for your reference. Third, we will try to have more hands-on session like this on abstract writing itself, and we can design those sessions. So please leave us that comment on the feedback that you would want something like this more, and we can then design it accordingly. So just those three things I wanted to flag. Yeah. If there are any more questions anybody has, please raise your hand. If there's any doubt you have, you could, this is the time, please raise it, and or you could put it in the chat box. I had a question actually, to Sriti and Ashwin. Like, while writing abstract, are there some things not to do, like something which you should totally avoid as a practice or a thing of writing, is not at all a good practice of writing an abstract? I know with different medium it differs, but still think that should be totally avoided. If you could flag it for the audience.
I think one thing that uh, can be avoided, but again, it depends on the medium, is to spend a lot of time justifying why what you have said is relevant. And I've seen this happening, especially with scholars from the global south, uh, because we tend to, because we hesitate in making an argument about why this is relevant. It's important to not spend too much time. It's important to outline why a contribution is important, but we also have to take up space and say that this is important and we think that's important, and not having to spend too much time in justifying why something is important or not. I have.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
And maybe another thing to avoid would be in that process of justifying, showing that you have read this much, you have read that much, you place them in conversation with multiple things that people generally say, because we know about the politics of citation. So often, what we try to do is in the abstract, we would want to refer to established concepts to say that this is why our argument is relevant. Uh, it can take away the focus from your key argument. So, one thing that I would also highly recommend is to be more assertive with your main argument. Uh, because the main argument is really the contribution that comes through the abstract, and the once it's there in the mind of the reader from the abstract, that is what we will be looking for when we're reading the paper or listening to the lecture or listening to the presentation. So being very forceful with with the main argument is important.
I think if we don't have any questions from the audience, we can wrap up today's session. And before we wrap up, I would just like to reiterate what Vidushi had just said, that we would like to have suggestions and recommendations from you on potential topics that we can cover in our future sessions. And we'll be also sending soon a feedback form, and we'd also like to know your feedback on this particular session and how we can further improve. That said, we are also present on all the social media platforms. Please do subscribe for our to get updates on our upcoming sessions, and we also have a mailing list. So I've also shared a Google document where you can subscribe to our mailing list to uh, uh, keep updated on our future sessions. Thank you so much again, Shriti and Ashwin, for such a wonderful session. And thank you also for participants for your wonderful engagement.